Okay, good morning. So we are at the two dots on the bottom of Chaf Dal and the base, and we are going to focus today on Chaf Hey. But before we do so, I just wanted to mention a couple of things that I didn't have a chance to yesterday. Number one, so the Gemara had told us that it was machlokes between Rav Huna and Rav Chizda in terms of if you're going in Makmat Tenofis, whether or not you're able to say Kriya Shema, cover your mouth and say the Kriya Shema or not. And the Gemara had brought a raya to each, etc. Among the things that we had said was we had tried to bring a proof from a story that had occurred with Rabbi Yochanan. We ended up saying that there wasn't a raya because of the fact that Rabbi Yochanan could have said, I hold like one way, meaning that according to Rabbi Yochanan, he could have held that when you go through the Makmat Nefes, you cover your mouth and say the Shema, and you, Rabbi Vo, his student, you hold differently. You held that you had to stop, and so therefore the question for you is, since you stopped, now that you're going to restart the Shema, do you have to go back to the beginning of the Shema, or can you go to the place from which you stopped? So first, as I mentioned yesterday, it's quite unbelievable that Rabbi Yochanan would be so tolerant of a student not passing like his own Rebbe, right? So he's going to say, okay, so for the way you decide, we'll go like this, but for me, I hold differently. That's number one. Number two, Taisvis points out here, we didn't have a chance to look at the Taisvis yesterday. Taisvis says, Amar le l'didilo sphere. I don't hold like this, but according to you, holds like this, then X, Y, and Z. So Taisvis explains, what does it mean that according to Rabbi Yochanan, he doesn't hold like this? Perish. Mishum tarti mili. There are two reasons why Rabbi Yochanan doesn't have to hold like Rabbi Ava. Why? Number one, he doesn't hold that you have to go back to the beginning. Rabbi Yochanan, because you have a Gemara Shana that tells us Shama Tesha Tkiyas B'Tesha Shoyas. Somebody heard the Tkiyas, but he didn't hear them all at one shot. He heard them over a period of 9 hours, meaning he heard them over random periods of time. The halacha is Yatza. Additionally, Tesis explains that if you would put your hand over your mouth and you would recite the Shema, that could be entirely sufficient. But according to your Bavo, who holds the Chayav Hafsek, so then the question becomes: do you chayz l'rosh or are you chayz there l'makom shepasak? So two reasons that according to Taisus, Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't have to hold like a Avo. Number one, because he holds that a person is able to say, let's say the tkiyas at different times of the day. He's able to hear the tkiyas at different times of the day, and that will be fine. So too, you can say one part of the Shema at one point, and another part of the Shema at another point, then it's no problem. So you don't have to be chayzer anywhere to the beginning. You can just continue. And of course, additionally, because of the fact that he holds that fundamentally you don't have to stop when you go into Makam Nefesh, you just simply cover your mouth, and that would be sufficient. I should also point out that the Tais is back on Chaf Beis and Beis. There's a Taisus Ella de Kule Alma Chaf Beis and Beis, but the Taisus is actually going on Chaf Gimel and Aleph, even though it's printed on Chaf Beis and Beis. There's a Taisus there in the middle of the page. Taisus Ella de Kule Alma Chayzel Rosh. According to everybody in that situation, you went back to the beginning. So Taisus explains you could have also made the argument the other way that you don't have to go back to the beginning. Because the Gemara didn't do that. And over there, because the Gemara went this way and said that everybody holds chayz l'rosh, that was the halacha. And then Taisus explains, and you see, in our Gemara over here, even though the Gersh on the side says chaf hey base, it really means chaf dal base. So Taisus says that it's very clear they have to be chayz l'rosh, even though we could have said the other way. Since we ended up going this way, you have to be chayz l'rosh. When we go to, and Taisus being a right from Ravo about being chayz l'rosh. Again, the situation will be if somebody had taken enough time to be basic that we have to be going back to the beginning. Now Taisus asks this as a question. What do you mean you have to be chayz l'rosh? Don't we have a Gemara Rosh Hashanah? And doesn't the Gemara Rosh Hashanah tell us that a person is blowing the tkiyas? Right? If he blows the tkiya over a period of 9 hours, he doesn't have to be chayzer l'rosh. So what are you saying? That you have to be chayzer l'rosh? I don't understand. If you could be tkiyas over 9 hours, then you should be able to say a shema at different points of the day. So Taisus here brings down an answer from the Sar Mikotzi, right? We had it now a number of times. And what does the Sar Mikotzi say? He wants to make a distinction between the tkiyas and the tefillas. And this is the fundamental point I wanted to bring out, which is as follows. By the tkiyas, he's a gavar chazoi. He's a person who's roy to be able to hear the tkiyas. There's no difference between the hour of 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, or 12 o'clock. He's a gavar chazoi. He's able to be roy to hear the tkiyas at any and all points of the morning. So the fact that he had the stopping in the middle of the tkiyas, he had to stop. But he was always roy to hear the tkiyas. But over here, by the situation of the Shemana Esrei going through the Makmat Nefesh, maybe he's not considered a Gavar Chazoy because at some points during his morning or whenever he was walking, maybe he wasn't supposed to be saying the Shema. So there you can understand that will be a hefsek. If it's a situation where you just, well, a guy blew the shofar, yeah, he blew the shofar. You ever have I remember growing up, I heard about Cam. He couldn't do it, right? He did a shofar blast and it went fine. And after a few of them, it didn't work. So he tried another shofar, then he wiped his mouth, then he wiped his shofar, and then he tried again, and it didn't work. So no one considered that to be a hefsek because obviously he's trying the whole time. But let's say it took a long time, whatever, they had to bring in somebody else. Right? At what point is that going to be considered hefsek? What the Simon Koitz is telling us is that it depends on the situation. You could easily see a distinction between somebody who's hearing tekiyas at different points in the day, that would not be considered a hefsek because he, the listener, was always right to hear that case there was no change. Whereas here, the davener could not, some points not be considered a gavar chazoi because of the fact that he was unable to, in fact, say the Shema at certain points when he was walking through the Makmat Nefesh, etc. This is one point that I wanted to mention from yesterday that I didn't have a chance. Second point I wanted to mention from yesterday was the Gemara tells us here, right before the two dots, a few lines above, was Rab Meisha Bar Breid Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Rab Meisha Bar Breid Rabbi Shua ben Levi, if you remember, we had a Gemara just before. It was on Chav Gimel and Aleph. The Gemara talked about Rab Meisha Breid Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So over there you have to look on the side, and the Gillian there on the side, from the A Mishpat, it brings down from the Sheiltas, that Rab Meisha was Bar Breid Rabbi Shua ben Levi. He wasn't the son, he was the grandson of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So why is this interesting? It's very interesting because of the fact that we have a bit of a backstory, right? The backstory is we have to understand is there's a Medrash Kehelis Rabbah. The Medrash tells us that Rabbi Shua ben Levi's son was dying. He was choking, and when he was choking, the Rabbi Shua ben Levi asked somebody, a doctor, to heal him, and the doctor healed him. But he was a Talmud of Bar Pandera, right? We're just now 9 Tevis. We have the fast on 9 Tevis. Today we're 10 Tevis, okay? But we didn't say this yesterday, so we'll mention now. Today's 10 Tevis, but it's brought down as also a fast on 9 Tevis. Why is there a fast on 9 Tevis? Nobody knows. Some say that the fast is for Shin Makalfas, the whole idea of switching out Christianity from Jews. We can't get more into it right now. In any event, this doctor, B'Shum Levi, got to help his choking son. He didn't heal him through normal means. He healed him through some sort of incantation, which had some clear Christological meaning or leaning, and therefore, Kishgaga Hayetzim Piashal, the Medrash says, Rabbi Shmuel Levi said that he saw someone was healed. He said, would it have been better had he not been healed? To be healed in such a manner, and in fact, his son died. Just to point out that that's a famous Gemara of Avodah of Zion about the Ben Dama, the nephew of Rabbi Shmuel, who we talked about maybe before, Menachos Tzadi Tesam Beis, where the whole story is. He said, and he said, no, that's when you're permitted to study Chachmas Yivan. It's only at that time. And we have another Ma'aseh there in Avodah Zarah of Zion that tells us that he was once dying. He was very hurt or whatever, and there was a doctor who could heal him, and that doctor was also from some sort of some sort of Christian background. And Rishmael said that it's better, and he asked his uncle to get him the doctor so he should be healed. And he said, no, better for you not to be healed by such a manner, because that is meanness, that is going to take you astray, etc. Coming back now to our Gemara. So we have Rabbi Shmuel Levi's son. He passes away because of whatever, some odd situation where he was healed by a Christian doctor, and Rabbi Shmuel Levi seems to have said that it would have been better had he passed away. The Kitzur Amaisa, this then opens up to us something very interesting, which is as follows. We've had a number of Gemaras, if you remember already in Brachot, Rabbi Shmuel Levi talking to his son. Right? He's saying to his son, he should make sure he goes to shul, make sure he does the Shnai Mikra, all the things that he said. Fine. Put that on the side. But we have another Gemara. The Gemara here we had the Gemara in Kedushin on Lamed, but we also had it earlier. The Gemara told us earlier on, if you remember, we had a whole back and forth debate as to the Baal Keri and what the Baal Keri rules were, right? Do you hold the Baal Keri, the Tfilas Ezra, etc.? So one of the things, the idea was that there was an Isser for the Baal Keri to recite the Shema. What was the Isser? Because they have a pasuk, Yem Asher Amata Shashem Lekecha B'Chayrev, and that pasuk of Yem Asher Amata Fnei Hashem Lekecha B'Chayrev was this smichos, and that smichos was next to the pasuk that says that a person is going to be right. He's going to teach his son or his grandchildren. And we had a smichos that we dash, even if you don't dash in smuchim b'chal Torah kul, you dash in them in dvarim. And what did we say? We said that this smuchim is such a big deal because of the fact that by Matan Torah, a person wasn't allowed to be a Baal Keri. So therefore, we learned out of that, right? This idea that it's an isser to when you're learning Torah to be a Baal Keri. That was the basis. If you recall, that was one of the two limudim that Rabbi Shimon Levi had about this pasuk. He had a second limud. What is the second limud of Rabbi Shimon Levi? The second limud of Rabbi Shimon Levi was whoever teaches the son Torah, it's like he accepted in Har Chorev. Why? Because Yom Hashem Matas Hashem Lekecha B'Charev is right next to the pasuk of Vayda'itim Levanecha Levanei Banecha, which is talking about Torah. So you see the juxtaposition to teaching Torah to your children and the Torah that you accepted at Matan Torah. Those are two limudim that he learned. Now, if that, and remember, Yehuda could have learned two limudim. He was only going to learn one. He picked the other one about the juxtaposition about teaching your kids. That's where he was going to be open and not have because for him he had to be not just it had to be clear in the pasuk, but also had to be mufna. And it wasn't mufna because it was being used to teach the idea that teaching your kids Torah or your grandchildren or your children Torah was like you're accepting the Torah at Matan Torah. However, if you look in Kedushin Lamed, you'll see a different gears in the Gemara there. The Gemara there, and I don't know why no one changes the gears over here, but over there, the Gemara says, "Kol ha'melamed leben b'nai Torah ki'ilu." Right, the exact Gemara. It's called melamed instead of leben. It's leben b'nai Torah. It's ki'ilu ma'ilo lavakas ki'ilu kibla ma'ar Sinai or ma'ar Chorev. Why? Because again, Yom Asher Amata Hashem Lekecha B'Chayrev is smichos to vayda'itam levanecha v'levnei banecha. Now, it come out very beautiful for why Rabbi Shimon Levi had this drasha that teaching your grandchildren Torah was so important because he himself is the one who raised his grandchild because his son had passed away. And in fact, we have a Gemara like that. We have a Gemara that tells us that Shimon Levi was one time in a situation where he was going to the bathhouse and he remembers, and this is the Yerushalmi, that Shimon Levi remembered that his he had not yet learned with his son. So he says, I can't go to the bathhouse yet. I still have to learn with my grandson. So that's another indication of this. Okay, that was two things that I didn't have a chance to do yesterday. Now I want to continue going. It says the Gemara, at the bottom of Chav Dal on the Gemara, Amar Huna. If somebody has a talus that is around their waist, that is to say, they're wearing clothing, but they're only covered from the bottom half, not the top half. So it's mutter to read the Kriyash If a person is covered from the waist down, whether it's made he has a leather covering or some sort of other type of a covering, doesn't make a difference. It's mutter to be karei kriyashma. What's the reason for that? Is because of the fact that as we said yesterday, all right, we had the Gemara about libay v'reisa erva. Libay v'reisa erva, if you have to cover the blanket up to your neck or up to your heart. But here it's not a situation because no libay v'reisa erva, right? There's no situation of that at all because you're covered. You're covered from the bottom half. So there's no issue about reciting the Kriyash Shema in such a situation. A man is not considered Dvar Erva, the upper half of his body. Again, we had the Gemara before on Chav Daled in relation to women. Okay, it continues the Gemara. So Tanya Talisa Shal Begam Shal Orev Shal Sak Chagur Al Muslim Mutzah Clear Shirish. Now we start in Chav Hey Amud Aleph on the top. Avo L'Tfilo. However, when it comes to davening, Achi Chases Liba, until you cover your heart. What do you mean until you cover your heart? Rashi explains. Tzarech Hulei Hagrois Es Atzmi Ke'emid Lifnei HaMelech. You have to stand in front of a Rebbeinu Shalom when you are saying the Shemona Esrei, like you are standing in front of a king. You have to stand in fear and awe. Kriya Shema is not talking to the king. What does that mean? Of course, you're davening the whole time. What it means to say is that Kriya Shema is not something you're begging to the Rebbeinu Shalom in that sense, but rather you are reciting the various different sukkot. Okay, so continues the Gemara. So we see a fundamental difference between Kriya Shema and Tefillah. A person can say the Shema even though they're half dressed. Whereas for tefillah, that is absolutely inappropriate. One has to be fully dressed. So again, we're going to have a few more Gemaras over here by Rav Huna. Rav Chisda. We know Rav Huna was generally more makel on these topics than Rav Chisda. And there is a machlokes that we're not going to maybe get to, maybe we will a little bit. Who you passing like? You passing Rav Huna or Rav Chisda? Rav Huna is earlier than Rav Chisda. And the question is, do you passing like Rav Huna or do you passing like Rav Chisda? Again, not a topic we can explore so much now, although I would say it's a machlokes. According to the Raf, you go with Rav Chisda, and the Rif, you go with Rav Huna. And so that makes it interesting. Okay, continues the Gemara. Ve'omar Rav Huna shachach v'nichnas b'tefillin b'sakisi. Remember what I said before about the rayas that they used to wear tefillin all day? This will be another raya. How do you forget that you have tefillin on your head when you're going to the bathroom? You only could possibly forget it if you wear tefillin all day, right? If you're the kind of person that's putting on tefillin once a day, it's hard to forget that you're going to the bathroom and you're wearing tefillin. Maybe it's possible. I don't know. Says the Gemara. So somebody literally went into the bathroom and he's wearing tefillin. You should put your hand on the tefillin until you finish. Really? Until you finished in the toilet, that's like okay, that you could keep on going to the bathroom? So it says the Gemara. I look at the Amr of Nachmar Yitzchak. Ad sheyigmar amoid rishon. Until you have the first sort of fecal disposition. That's the nicest way to put it, right? And so until somebody does that, then after they do that, then they should go out and take off the tefillin. Just says the more 1 second. Why are you saying that he's able to at least go to the bathroom a bit, and then he has to come out and take off the tefillin? He should stop right then and there, the moment he realizes that he has tefillin on, and run out the bathroom and take off the tefillin. So the Moshe says, no, we don't make him do that. Mishum Rav Shimon Gamliel, because we know from Shimon Gamliel of a medical truth, at least in those days. I'm not sure if this is currently correct in the medical literature or not. So what did the Brisa say? The time of Shimon Gamliel, Omer Amud HaChozer, maybe it's Adamudei Hadrakain. Stilan HaChozer, maybe it's Adamudei Yerakain. So if somebody sort of holds back when they have to go to number 2, they get one type of a disease. And if they hold back Silan, which is urine, if they hold that back, then they can get to Yerakain, another type of disease. In any event, the point is as follows: when you're coming into the bathroom, you're wearing tefillin, and you didn't realize this. You didn't take off the tefillin. Or we have already discussed previously what happens when a person's going to the bathroom. All the different takanas things is there. So you put it in the holes on the outside. You put in the holes on the inside. Can you put it in a kiss? Can you take it out? All the different things. We had all the different gemaras about what you do with the tefillin. This is not our case here. The case here is we're talking about a situation where the guy walks in to the bathroom with his tefillin on by mistake. So in such a situation, he walks into the bathroom with his tefillin on by mistake. In that situation, when he's already there, now what do you do? So the Gemara is telling us that you're able to have a first Amud Harisha and is able to come out of a person, and then you should get up, take off the tefillin. Why? Why don't we make him just immediately hold back what he's doing and take off the tefillin? Because it could cause some sort of a disease. Then is the Gemara. Itmar tsoy al basarei. What happens if somebody has fecal matter on his body? Right? Again, how does this happen? Situation like this is an odd situation, but such a thing could happen never. So a person realizes that he has tsoya on his body. Or he has a hand, or maybe 2 hands, depending on the girsa, in the bathroom. So he has, again, either tsoya al basarai, or his hands are in the bathroom. Those are the 2 cases that we are discussing right here. So the Gemara explains, again, a machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Chisda, and this time we're going to get a fundamental dispute to understand why they argue. Maybe this will help explain all the different arguments that we've had between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. As follows, says the Gemara, Rav Huna Amar Mutar Likreish Kriyashma. Rav Huna says if somebody has tsoya on their body, he's able to say Shema. Rav Chizda Amar Asa l'kriya Kriya Shema. Rav Chizda says to Asa to be carried Kriya Shema. We have to come back to this in a second. So Amar Rava, my time with Rav Huna. Rava comes on to explain what's the reason Rav Huna that says mutter to be carried Kriya Shema even if somebody has Tzayal B'Sari, even if somebody has Yodim Menachas Aves Hakisei. So he explains like this: Dichsev Kol Aneshama Tahalel Kol. Right, my soul. Right, the end of Tehillim, the last chapter. Right, all the soul will praise the Lord. So Kol Neshama Tahal Kol. Rashi explains, Hapeh v'achaytem b'chlal ha'chilov lo shari varm. What is the thing that is praising the Lord? Kol Neshama Tahal Kol. What is the Neshama? The seed of the Neshama is the head. The only things that are engaged in praising the Rebbeinu Shalom is the peh and the chaytem, is the mouth and the nose, and therefore, since the rest of the body is not engaged in that, the fact that somebody has tzeh somewhere else on the body is not going to prevent them from saying the Shema. Rav Chizda Amar, also the Kriya Shema. Rav Chizda says, no. What are you talking about? The halacha is that it's also to recite the Kriya Shema. My time, Rav Chizda. My whole body is screaming out, who is like you, the Rebbeinu Shalom? So what do you mean that only the mouth and the nose are engaged in the praise of the Rebbeinu Shalom? The whole body is fully engaged. So therefore, the whole body is fully engaged, and you have your hands in the bathroom, or you have tzayal b'sarai. So of course, then that can't be engaged in the praise of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and therefore it would be asur. But this now sounds like a more sort of a fundamental way of explaining why Rav Huna is more meko and why Rav Chizda is more machmer. Right. So think about again about the case of the Makmat Tenefis, where Buddha says, put your hand on your mouth and recite the Shema. He says, Chatz and Shalom, you can't say anything. Right? Because according to Rav Huna, the peh is the thing that's fundamentally engaged in the praise of Hashem. If the peh is covered, the peh is sort of being allowed to do its thing, then what's the problem? Rav Chizda is saying, no, your whole body's engaged in it. Your whole body's surrounded by Makmat Tanefis. You're not covering your whole body, you cover your mouth, you're not covering the rest of the body. And that's all surrounded by Makmat Tanefis. Then you shouldn't be saying the Shema. That's how potentially we can understand it. Okay. Here's the Gemara. Another machlokes between Rav Huna and Chizda. So idma reach rosh yesh lo ikr. Right. If somebody is a situation where there's a bad smell, sheyesh lo ikr, meaning the causation. Right. The causation is clear. So obviously, if you're dealing with a situation now, if this new case of the Gemara is idma reach rosh yesh lo ikr, then what was the previous machlokes about? Right. Before we said soyal b'sarei. Right, sorry, Rav Huna is saying it's mutter, Rav Chizda is saying it's asur. Now we're saying it mayet ruach. If there's a situation where there's a reach ra, yesh lo ikr is soya, right? So what's the difference? So one possible thing to say is that the previous case doesn't have any reach ra, so there's soya al but there's no reach ra. Another possibility is that the previous case is al basari, it's specifically al basari. It's a type of a point, right? Whereas here we're not talking about something al basari. It's talking about a situation where it's on the side, right? But it has a smell. So either way, what we have is again another machlekes between Rav Huna and Rav Chizda. So the situation with it's tzaya and it has a reach ra. So what's the halacha? Rav Huna amar marchik dalat amis v'karei kriya shema. Rav Huna says you separate yourself out 4 amis to say, and you say the Shema. It does make a difference when you separate yourself out from the 4 amis, what the situation is at that point. As long as your 4 amis separated, that's sufficient. That's the position of Rav Huna. Rav Chizda Amar Machid Dalat Amis Imakim Shepasak Hareach V'Karei Kriya Shema. Rav Chizda disagrees. Rav Chizda says it's not a vart that you simply separate yourself 4 amis from the tzaya. You have to separate yourself 4 amis from where the tzaya stops smelling. Right? If you separate yourself 4 amis and it still smells. So again, is it a question of a machlokes in sort of if you separate, bless you, and if you separate yourself 4 amis, that by definition means there's no smell? It's not clear from the Gemara like that. Rav Huna is saying as long as you separate yourself 4 amis, then it's fine. Rav Chizda is saying no, you separate yourself 4 amis. I agree, but only makom shepasek haruach, only from the area where the smell has already dissipated. If you just simply separate yourself out, but the smell is still there, then what's the big benefit? So the Gemara says that I want to bring a raya like Rav Chizda. Tanya kavasei Rav Chizda. I want to bring you a raya like Rav Chizda. What's the big raya like Rav Chizda? Lo yikra adam kriya shema lo ykeneget seyas adam v'lo ykeneget seyas klavim. this brisa tells us that you're not allowed to recite the Shema again opposite the feces of humans or dogs, or pigs, right, or chickens, ashpa, right, or near the garbage dump, sherecha ra, right, because there the smell is very bad. But if your place that you're standing is more than 10 tefachim, right, as we understand, the Ritva points out, right, 10 tefachim is considered to be a real separation. It's a significant amount of distance. So therefore, in that kind of a situation, then that would be considered like a sort of a new place. So in those situations, then you'll be able to recite the Shema. Then you can recite the Shema. But if not, if you're not like in that sense distant in terms of height or depth away from the Re'eh that you're still able to see it very easily, but then you have to mamash separate yourself out. You have to separate yourself out far from it. This is part one of the Brisa. And so too, this is not just about Kriya Shema, but it's also about Shemana Esrei. You have a situation where you have a Reach Ra, and this Reach Ra has again a basis. You see the feces there. You have to separate yourself out for 4 amas, and then you can recite the Shema. So again, Mechel Tefillah Reach Ra Sheyesh Li Iker Marchit Al Amas Imakam Areach V'Karei Kriya Shema. Right, so the person has to separate himself out for Amas and then recite the Shema. When I read this brisa, I didn't understand what is the raya to Rav Chizda. We're saying here in the brisa, we understand we're talking about the various different soyas of a kelev and a chazir and all of these things that you can't recite the Shema opposite them. Fine, but it doesn't tell us there are halacha about the distance. Then we have halacha about asar tzvachim, up and down. So the first place where we get to the Daled Amis is in the end, right? It says, Reach rosh yesh le'ikr, marchit Daled Amis imakom reach v'ker krishma. Who's that a raya to? That sounds like a raya to Rav Huna. Why? Because it doesn't say, I'm sorry, that's a raya to, the Gemara is telling us that it's a raya to Rav Chizda, right? Because the Gemara says that Rav Chizda, the Gemara open up this brisa, Tanya Kava say, the Rav Chizda, this is a raya to Rav Chizda. What did Rav Chizda say? Rav Chizda said that Mimakim Shapasa Kareach. Rav Huna is the one who said Dalet Amas is your machik from Dalet Amas from the Reach Ra, and then you could say it. Over here, it doesn't say they have to machik Dalet Amas from Mimakim Shareach Pasak. It says Dalet Amas Mimakim Areach. Isn't that a right to Rav Huna, not to Rav Chizda? So I was bothered by that. I don't have an answer, and no one asked the question. But if you look in the Rif has a different girsa here, and the Rif answers the question by definition. The Rif says on Tezayin and Mabez in the Dapi Rif, the Rif said brings down again. This is a right to Rav Chizda, and he says v'chein l'tfilah the Reach Ra sheyesh lo iker, right, which is our case. Machik arba amas mimakim shekolo haruach the Kriya Shema. So that would be exactly what Rav Chizda said, right? So that adds in the words mimakim shekolo haruach. You don't just simply mimachik dal amas from the area of the Reach Ra, but mimakim shekolo haruach from where that Reach Ra already stopped. Then it would come out a pashut raya from this brisa to Rav Chizda, and would not be a raya to Rav Huna. So that's how I can understand the Gemara. So at this stage of the Gemara, what does it sound like? It sounds like we have a raya to the way Rav Chizda learns as opposed to Rav Huna. Again, this is for the basis of, if you look in the Taisus, we didn't do the Taisus on Chav Dalin and base, but it's Shaykh to Chav Hey the bottom Taisus. It's one of those weird Taisus, and Taisus does not quoting a different master from the Gemara. Taisus just says Pasuk Rabbeinu Chananah to Rav Chizda. But then Taisus brings down Rav Alpha's Pasuk Rav Huna, right? He brings down both of the different understandings. But in any event, for our purposes now, at this stage of the Gemara, we have a raya, at least the Gemara has said it's a raya to Rav Chizda, from the way the Rif is understanding the Brisa, that makes sense. So where do you have to separate yourself out? This Reach Ra sheyesh lo iker. You have to separate yourself. Daled Amas mimakim shepasak haruach, right? Once the Reach stops, that's when you count Daled Amas. You don't just count Daled Amas from the Reach. That's not enough. You have to first go to an area where it doesn't smell, and then count for Amos, and that's when you're able to say the Shema.
It says in Malcolm Reach, so that's the radius of the Reach. You have to mark it yourself down on this. Rahuna says mark it down on the stump, just from here's where the thigh is, you have to mark it yourself down on. Or here's where the Reach is down on. But Malcolm Reach is anywhere where there's Reach, you have to be
So you're reading that into the words. I didn't read it into the words. I read it into the words as Rav Huna. That's what I'm saying. It's for me. It's more clear to say Malcolm Reach means you just count from where the Reach is. You just count for Amos. It doesn't have to be that. It's stopped. Rav Chizda said you have to first make sure that the Reach is not here, and then you count for Amos. And that's what I'm saying. That's what the Rif is making out clear. Okay. Continue. So before we go any further, oh no, we'll go one more line here. So before we get to the Taisis. The Ritva hold all the fun over here. So Amar Rava, less hilchos l'kihamas nisa. The Rava says the halacha is not like the Mishnah. Not like this brisa. The halacha is not like this brisa. What do you mean the halacha is not like this brisa? The halacha is not like what we just said. Let's just finish, because what does Rava hold? Alakiha. Rather, the halacha is like this other brisa. What does the other brisa say? The Tanya leikar on kriyashma loikeneged says sodom loikeneged says chazirim loikeneged says klavim. We have another brisa that says you can't recite the Shema next to the feces of humans, of pigs or dogs. Mijman shenasan oris atechan. That's when tanners used to use the skins and put the skins in these kind of feces. I don't really understand why. Rashi explains that they only would do it with the tzeres of the chazirim or the tzeres of the club, but not with the tzeres of humans. Again, I don't really know the tanning business, but that's the indication. So therefore, the halacha is saying that you're not able to recite the Shema in next to those situations, but it doesn't mention here every single case that we just said before. So again, according to the prior brisa that we had just seen, the prior brisa said that you don't have to recite the Shema, look connected says, I'm looking at says, club, looking at says, chazim, looking at says, etc., etc., and it didn't qualify it as having to do with the skins. Nothing to do with skins. This bride is saying no. When is it says klavim aser? When is it says chazirim aser? Only if you're using the skins to tan with the feces. That's when it'll be aser to recite the Kriya Shema. But if it wasn't, if it was just says chazirim regular or says klavim regular, then it will be permitted to recite the Shema. That's what it seems that the halacha would be. So here we have a Taisus, Rashi, etc. So Rashi and Taisus, they're already noting as follows. What was missing in this new brisa from Rava? One of the things that's missing from the brisa from Rava is we don't talk about tzeres taner goyim. We're not talking about chickens, right? This new brisa only seems to be limiting it to dogs and to pigs and to humans. Humans obviously they don't use that for tanning, but the tzeres taner goyim and tzeres taner klavim v'chazirim they do. And the halacha seems to be Rava's clear that only in those situations would those types of tzara be aser. So it comes out, if you look in Taisus over here, Taisus says, what about tzeres taner goyim? Since this new brisa didn't come along and knock off the old brisa, so Taisus says that tzeres taner goyim would be actually remain aser, because this new brisa is not coming along and be materit, so the tzeres of taner goyim is aser. And then Taisus says that there's an understanding by based on Yerushalmi, etc., maybe that ends up that the only things that are going to be aser in terms of the taner goyim is red types of chicken. What's the issue with red types of chicken? Taisus says I have no idea. Taisus says Taisus says I have no idea why the tzoya of red chickens is particularly aser. Taisus says he's not sure about that. But if you look in the side, they quote from the Dulas Mordechai that in the Eretz Edom they used to when they had a lot of sort of sa'irim, that's what the chickens would eat, and that would make them, I guess, have a very bad sort of smell kind of feces. Should point out, we don't have time now to do it. Rabbi Yonah adds that Lamaisa, halacha Lamaisa, after all this is said and done, so he has a very long Arichas. The Ritva quotes a lot from it as well, that it's really only talking about the feces of donkeys that come in from the road. That's what we're limiting it to. But most other types of fecal matter, again, non-situations of tanneries, would be considered mutter. This is the basic understanding of Rabbeinu Yonah lahalacha l'maisa. Okay, in any event, continues the Gemara. So the Gemara says as follows: They asked Rav Sheshes the following question: Reach ra She ain't like ikrama. What's the halacha if you have a reach ra, but there's no substance, right? There's no fecal matter there that's causing the reach ra. What's the situation? The situation is that, for example, a person passed gas, right? So in that kind of a situation, what would the halacha be? So Amar Lahu, Rav Sheshis responded the following. Also, chazdu hani tipid beirav. Go, he says, go look in the yeshiva. The hani ganav hani garsi. There are people, as the Rabbeinu Chananel points out, people are some people lying on the mats and some people are learning. And as Rashi points out, and Rabbeinu points out, it's not possible for people to be sleeping without having passing wind. So you see, people are learning, and they're next to people that are passing gas, and there's no problem. So this should then be a raya that maybe it's okay. Says the Gemara, no, that maybe only by different Torah that's okay. Right? But when it comes to Kriyash it wouldn't be permitted. But different Torah, the Gemara clarifies that even by different Torah that you say it's okay to learn, even though it doesn't smell so great, that's only El Dechavrei. That's only if the person who was sleeping is the one passing the wind. Now, will they loy? But if a person himself is passing the wind, he needs to stop until the smell goes away. It says the Gemara, in Martzaya Veras, what happens if you have a situation where you have Tsaya that is passing through? In other words, it's not the area of Tsaya, it's not like in the ground, but you have some sort of a situation where the animal or a wagon or something is passing through with Tsaya, but it's going to be gone in a minute. So Rashi points out that it could be a situation where somebody's carrying a graf shor A or something like that. So in that situation, Abaya says Abaya mutar l'kriyash kriyashma, Rav Amma also l'kriyash kriyashma. It's machlekes Abaya Rav Amma. Abaya mina I mean Allah. Abaya says, you know what my proof is to you? The Tanah and Atame and Mitachasin Matar over Tame. Right? The halacha is by a mitzvah that if it's a situation where the Tame is standing under a tree, it is a very chomerdik kind of tuma, like it could be like an oil being matama others. So if the Tame is standing under a tree and a Torah is over and a Torah is walking by, the halacha is Tame. And Torah metachasilan v'tamei oiver, and vice versa. If a Torah is the one standing under a tree, and the tamei is going by, halachas is Torah. But v'im omad, if the mitzvah stops, then he'll be tamei. So too, if there's a stone, that's tamei as well. So what is the point of Abaya Shita? Abaya Shita is saying that if somebody who's tamei from tzaras is standing under a tree, he can be matama others who are walking by the tree. But if a Torah is standing under the tree and the Tommy walks by, he's not going to be matama. So too, when you have a graf sharei passing through, that you are able to say the Shema. It doesn't have an impact because it's passing through. The Rav Amar and Rav says no. Rav Amar Chahasam Bikfiyus Italian Milsa Dechsiv. What the Yeshim B'chus Lamachan Meishav. You know why? The reason why that he's not being matama you when he's walking by your tree that you're standing on, because the pasuk is very clear that the mitzvah is matame. But the Yeshim B'chus Lamachan Meishav. He has to be standing. He has to be sitting. He has to make it the place wherever he is his place. But if he's just passing through, he passes under your trees. That's why he's not being matama you. But over here, the issue by Shema is not a vart in the issue of tzaras. The issue is vaya machanecha kadosh. Amar of halak. You have to have the area around you. You have to be a holy place, and this is not. This is lacking in a situation where you have a graf over A passing through, and therefore, according to Rava, one will be asked to say Shema. Continues the Gemara. Amar apav pi chazir k'tzayah ve'ezdami. The halacha is that the Gemara that a chazir, when it goes by, is considered a tzayah. It's considered just dirty. Right? And we know pigs today are by definition dirty, even though they themselves are clean, but because they don't have sweat glands, they have to be always going in the mud. But it's certainly understood then that a chazir is considered tzoya feres, right? It's exactly like the case that we just had. So whether or not you're able to say Kriya Shema, so the Gemara says, Pshita, I don't need to teach me that a pig chazir is like a tzoya feres. Of course, a pig is always rooting in the mud. Of course, he's going to be considered like tzoya feres. So the Gemara says, no, Afa gav the solik minara, even if he's coming up from the river. If it happens to be, if you look very fascinatingly at the Shulchan Aruch and Archaim, and Ayin Vav brings this down the halacha exactly like the Gemara says, that a pig chazir is a tzoya feres. Afagav the solik minar. Even if after comes out of a river and he's perfectly clean, he's still a tzoya veres, because by definition a pig, and therefore a pig is a tzoya veres. But the Rambam, when the Rambam brings down this halach, he does not bring it down like the Gemara says. The Rambam only brings it down in Hilchos Kriya Shema that the pi chazir is a tzoya veres, but it doesn't say the halach about even if it came out of the river. All right, putting that on the side, we have to stop. But just one more line. So the Gemara says as follows: Ravuta suffix tzara asura, suffix meraglayim mutter. One is if it's a suffix, you don't know if it's tzara or not. So suffix the halacha is also suffix meraglaim is mutter. You get that remember the suffix bevias muteres. The suffix in a house will be mutter, but ashba asur because an ashba is more considered to be ruggle for that, so that would be asur. Suffix meraglaim, but a suffix of meraglaim since it's more makel, I feel ba ashba nami mutarin. We hold like Rav Hamnuna, Adam Rav Hamnuna, Asher Torah El Keneged Amud Bilvad. What's the Torah answering up? The Shema is only real next to real Re'eh, next to real Tzaya. But situations of suffix, etc., that we're going to be able to be more makel. Rabbi Yonasan, and this is like Rabbi Yonasan. The Rabbi Yonasan made a stira. The pasuk says, they have to make a special place where they go to the bathroom when they went to the army. They have to have a spade to be able to cover up the tzayah. So it sounds like a steer. One place it sounds like you have a special place so you don't have to cover up the feces. Another place it sounds like you have to cover it up. So what does it mean? So the more okay, it's like kambik del and kambik tanim. It's the difference between del and ktanim. Alma ktanim like asra Torah el kanagan amud bavad. So it sounds like by ktanim we are much more makel, and the only place where the Torah is answering is only where you mamish have the stream of urine itself. But where it hits the ground, then it'll be mutter. Rabbanon who the gazban, the Rabbanon, the ones who added an exera. And where do the rabbis add an exera about meraglaim is only in a vadai situation. But by a suffix, they were not geyser at all. Okay, we'll stop over here.